I'm New York State Education Commissioner Tom Sobel. How much we depend on words, and printed words, to communicate and store the accumulated knowledge of mankind, and how much of our priceless cultural heritage is eroding, virtually disappearing before our eyes. Today we talk about a little-known but important problem. The materials in our libraries, archives, and historical societies are quietly deteriorating. Books, historical documents, maps, photographs, films, sound recordings, and other research materials are being silently, almost invisibly, destroyed. Acidic compounds used in paper manufacturing or absorbed from the environment actually burn paper from within, causing it to become brittle and useless. Surveys in large research libraries indicate that 1/3 to 1/2 of their collections are already so brittle that just turning the pages can cause them to break into pieces. Immediate action is needed to prevent the irreparable loss of the information these endangered materials contain. The New York State Education Department is taking steps to save materials already endangered and to prevent the problem from growing. In landmark 1984 library legislation, the first state-supported program for the conservation and preservation of library research materials was established. In the past 4 years, $7.2 million has been spent in New York to preserve materials and to encourage libraries in their preservation. The results have been encouraging. The program is helping the state's large research libraries support the burden of preservation as they provide for it in their budgets, procedures, and long-range plans. In addition, the program provides preservation grants to other libraries, archives, and historical societies throughout the state. But preservation of research materials is not just a problem of the institutions that collect and house the materials. Research done using historical records affects all of our lives. For example, engineers and investigators have used land use permits, maps, photographs, and other archival records to study the Love Canal and to determine the location and nature of other toxic dump sites throughout the state. Historical records can also be used to support improved health care. Medical researchers study patient records to understand genetic and familial diseases that are transmitted from generation to generation. They also use records to trace the spread of contagious diseases within geographical regions. Such analysis can lead to major breakthroughs in health research that can save lives. These are only examples. The information in libraries and in our historical records is a raw material that supports our society and provides the knowledge we need to make it work and to correct its problems. The deterioration of these records is, therefore, a problem that concerns all citizens and requires everyone's support. We must make sure that the wealth of New York State's vast cultural resources is not lost.
Thank you, Commissioner Sobel. Hi, I'm Ed Daig, the moderator of today's teleconference, and joining us today as panelist, David Stamm, University Librarian for the Syracuse University Library, and Connie Brooks of the New York State Program for the Conservation and Preservation of Library Research Materials. And we suspect that you too, the viewer, would like to join in the teleconference with comments or questions for the panelists. If you would, call us collect. Our telephone number is area code 518-473-5941. The New York State Education Department plays a key role in the affairs of libraries and museums, archives throughout the state. The Office of Cultural Education is responsible for the charter and regulation of many of these institutions, and it provides funding as well, which may surprise some people, Connie, but in fact, give us some idea, if you would, of what the State Education Department is doing in the whole area of conservation.
The State Education Department is approaching preservation in two ways. The first way is through an educational program, and the second way is through 3 different grant programs. The first 2 of these grant programs are really targeted toward 11 large research libraries in the state, of which Syracuse University Library is one. And the first of these is $90,000 that goes annually to each of the libraries that can be used largely as they wish to help them develop their preservation programs in the manner they see fit. The other $350,000 is a competitive grant, and it's available for cooperative preservation projects involving 2 or more of the institutions of those 11 libraries. We've had many interesting projects come through those. One of them was sponsored by Syracuse University Library and was for the transfer of acetate-based sound recordings to a more stable medium.
Interesting. David, what were those recordings? Old-time radio shows? Or?
Oh, they varied from not radio shows, but some quite a lot of unique recordings of music, political speeches of Governor Dewey, for instance. Mm-hmm. The Cornell Ornithological Laboratory was one of our participants, and it had recorded bird songs which trace the dialects of birds, for example. A fascinating part of the project. And there were some broadcasts. Eastman School participated at Rochester. Very
well, tell me something about the scope. I'm fascinated that there's audio tapes involved, and the commissioner, of course, spoke about all sorts of written records. What all are we talking about here at an institution as large as your research library?
Well, that particular project dealt with acetate tapes and discs, a particularly threatened medium. But in the entire program, we're talking about all sorts of materials, everything from brittle paper to parchment to archives, maps, film, video, audio cassettes, anything that has recorded information on it.
You're chairman of the Advisory Council for Conservation Preservation. Is this a universal problem worldwide?
Well, I'm chairman of the New York State program, but I think it's fair to say that this is a worldwide problem. I have been involved in preservation for some time, and I've done a bit of traveling in relation to it, and I've been from Japan to India to Cairo to Western Europe, and I have to say the degree varies, but the problem is there everywhere.
Connie, in fact, we've titled this program, which I think we borrowed. I'm not saying plagiarized, we borrowed it from a documentary, but slow fires is kind of a dramatic phrase. Is it accurate, or are we being overly dramatic?
I think it's accurate. It certainly is dramatic. We hope it is. We want to get people's attention about this problem. We call it slow fires because it's not readily apparent. You don't think of things in libraries as being destroyed, and yet they are. And some paper, for instance, may be away and look perfectly fine, and yet when someone pulls it out to read it, it will just disintegrate in their hands.
But I've seen the Gutenberg Bibles. They look like they're in wonderful shape. Is there a difference?
Yes, the Gutenberg Bibles are in wonderful shape. Papermaking changed around 1850 as the Industrial Revolution came along, and more wood pulp was used, and chemical processes were devised to deal with the change from rag to wood pulp. And these manufacturing processes were more acidic and caused, in combination with things like moisture in the air, caused acid to form in the paper.
So the paper is really self-destructing, modern paper?
Yes.
Interesting. Almost the more modern the medium, the more volatile. If we had stayed with Sanskrit written in clay tablets, you'd have no problem.
Weather problem.
Weather problems. Erosion would be the problem. The magnitude of the problem posed by slow fires is one that affects each of us. All aspects of our culture are contained in some form on paper. The permanence of information is something that we take for granted. The scope of what we must protect and save, though, is monumental.
The New York Public Library is one of the largest libraries in the United States. It contains over 7 million books, manuscripts, written records, pictures, and other library materials. Over 30 million items in all, many of which are rare and irreplaceable. These items, and the books and materials in all of our libraries and museums, convey to us who we are and where we come from. This legacy of our past is threatened by a slow fire burning out of control. Much of the paper produced in the past 100 years is deteriorating due to the chemicals used as it is manufactured. This slow fire of deterioration is burning in stacks of crumbling newspapers, in books so brittle they can't be read, in maps and manuscripts alike. In hundreds of locations across the state, the same drama unfolds. If left unchecked, we will soon have no past to explore, no identities but what the present teaches us, and no possibility of passing on our legacy to future generations.
I was working with newspaper clippings from the 1870s, and before I could get them to the Xerox machine, they would disintegrate in my hand. It was the most terrible experience because I knew I was dealing with unique information, and that when it disintegrated, not only would I have no authority for what it was I wanted to write, but it would be gone forever.
Newspapers, telephone directories, and most other publications have been printed on paper with a relatively short lifespan. They may contain information that could be important long after the paper they are printed on has completely disintegrated.
Religious history, Jewish history, Jewish culture, and Jewish tradition are all recorded on thousands, perhaps millions of pieces of paper written and produced over the centuries. These pieces of paper contain our heritage, our traditions. These pieces of paper are in danger of disappearing into dust.
When you think that if the New York Public Library had not way back preserved the Warsaw telephone books from 1937, Jews after World War II would have had no basis for reparations claims. That was one microfilming project very early on. We never thought that would be important, and yet look what's happened.
Around 1850, a process of making paper from wood developed and soon became widespread. Acids used in this process produce a paper of limited permanence and durability. Over the course of time, this paper becomes acidic and brittle, deteriorating from a slow fire within.
Here's a book 700 years old, here's one 500 years old. These books are 80 years old. You can see how much better the older books are than the newer books are.
Before the Industrial Revolution, rag stock was used and paper was handmade, and there wasn't this terrible problem. But ironically, with the leap in literacy and the demand for information with the Industrial Revolution, they started to use wood pulp and alum rosin compounds to stop the ink from running and to make the paper smooth. And as a result of that, the alum combines with moisture and creates sulfuric acid within the paper. People in preservation call it slow fires because the paper is consuming itself. I'd like to show you what a dead book looks like. This is a book that we've microfilmed, and this is what's left of it. As you turn the pages, it's all disintegrating. Let me show you this. This is a page in a book, but what's going to be left of it? Nothing. Nothing but dust. And this is what we have to deal with. And once you've seen a dead book, the way that feels is just terrible.
Within our libraries, we look to find discrete information on an infinity of topics. Our libraries are repositories for the diverse information which collectively we refer to as our culture. This deterioration threatens all information on paper. How will it affect us?
Oftentimes I'm tracing individuals who we can't find, they're settled in the state, for instance. We need to know where the person might have moved. I might have to go through city directories, phone books, things of this nature. If these materials didn't exist, it would be impossible to do the sort of tracing work that I do. Many of the materials, of course, are in terrible condition. They're unique to the division. They may be one of just 2 or 3 copies that exist in the entire world, so naturally it has great relevance.
Researchers make use of some books. They also rely on artifacts. In the performing arts, such items are key to understanding the development of artistic expression.
The Juilliard School received a grant from the state which enabled us to preserve 3 special collections within our library. 2 of these collections involved performance materials. One of them was a collection of libretti, mostly 19th century librettos from France. The other was a collection of Liszt early and first editions. This collection is particularly significant to the music community. We receive many requests from performers and scholars for access to this material, and we couldn't allow users to come and see it because of the fragile condition of the paper and of the bindings.
Archives are specialized repositories of historical documents. Their collections are also in danger of being lost.
The LaGuardia Archives is a special collections repository, one of the best collections we have for documenting the social history of the people of Queens is the Steinway & Sons Piano Factory records. And these records document not only the growth, the cultural and social growth of Queens and transportation, but the history of immigration, the history of work in the American experience, the relationships of management and labor.
Maps display features of the Earth's surface and also reveal social, economic, and political realities, distinctions which must be maintained for historical purposes.
I'm here researching for a book on expressionist art from Germany from the 1920s. I came here to find a map, an American-made map specifically, of Germany from 1920. If we couldn't find original maps from that era, it would be a devastating loss. We cannot use something that was put together later on because it's an interpretation and not something that is of that time.
Irreplaceable elements of ethnic and cultural history are held in numerous specialized collections.
At the Schomburg Center, we collect information by and about black people wherever they exist in the world. And there's virtually no other place that collects as comprehensively as we do. So our mission to preserve black culture is doubly important because in some cases, black culture is only preserved at the Schomburg and nowhere else. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Conservation and preservation are important in the library of the Museum of the American Indian because in many cases we hold unpublished records which are literally unavailable elsewhere. We have field notes from archaeological expeditions that record the prehistory or the post-contact history of Native American groups all over the Western Hemisphere. If they're not preserved, people in the future won't be able to use them.
As you view this program, the slow fire burns, consuming works and ideas of our time and of those who came before us. Our culture is on paper, and we must not let it crumble. Each of our lives is connected in numerous ways with paper. We must save what we have.
I think that someone from 200 years from now could look back on this period and think it was another dark age where the written word had virtually disappeared.
Things that you have to be struck by, I think, in that segment is the extraordinary variety of information that is affected by the slow fires. We just saw implications of deterioration for Native American history, for Jewish and black culture, labor movements, artists, areas of learning and knowledge that are as varied as our history. And it strikes me, David, if the New York Library has 30 million volumes in some trouble, nationwide, even statewide, it's such an enormous problem. But you can't possibly save everything. So how do you decide what to save and what to let go?
Well, you've hit one of our most difficult problems. We don't don't like the role that we implicitly play of playing God, whether a benign God or a neglectful God in relationship to materials. What we really have to do is develop systems of priorities, systems of triage, if you will, which identifies what can be saved, what are the appropriate treatments for appropriate materials, and in many cases, what will simply have to be lost. We can't save everything. One of my favorite statistics is the amount of the archival records which the National Archives retains. It's somewhere between 3 and 5%. The rest is lost. Some of it no one will ever miss. Some, like the records of the Alexandrian Library, which were burned, may well be missed.
One of the striking aspects of this thing, Connie, was the final thought. That 200 years from now, you might look back at this culture and decide we produced nothing because it's all deteriorated. There is a change coming, I'm led to believe, that the paper that was so acidic we've been making isn't the only paper we now know how to make.
Yes, we now know how to make an alkaline paper that is both permanent and durable. That is, it's chemically stable and also resistant to wear. And you might think that that would be more expensive, but actually, once a plant has been converted, which is an expensive process, it can be made for the same price or maybe even less expensive. And there are lots of people and groups that are now pressuring to put more materials on acid-free paper. Barbara Goldsmith, whom you saw in that last video segment, is someone who, as an author, has been working hard to get authors to insist that publishers put more of their books on acid-free paper, and there's even now a newsletter called the Alkaline Paper Advocate.
Let me ask you this. It struck me when David was talking that, yeah, it's a terrible problem to have to decide what to save and what not to save, but it's even more difficult perhaps to get at what's there, what's available to be saved. Is there any sort of mechanism where people can come to someone and say, hey, I got records for this company that folded in 1920, and get money to preserve them?
Yes, there is. They can come to us. We have a discretionary grant program that is available for really institutions throughout New York State that aren't the 11 large libraries that I mentioned earlier. They don't have to be libraries. They can be museums, archives, historical societies, really almost any institution. The grants, there's $500,000 available annually, and the maximum grant is usually $25,000, although we've given grants for $340,000.
How old is David, the preservation idea and conservation? How long have we been giving grants? How long have we been working at it?
In New York State?
Yeah.
This legislation, I think the commissioner pointed out, goes back to 1984. I believe we started working on that legislation as early as 1980, and it took a while to get through, and it's really a fine collaborative effort. You can claim, I think it's true, that New York State has led the way. There are at least 4 other states that have followed our example. There are a good number of others that would like to, and New York is still the largest such program in dollars of preservation support.
We probably have not built a lot of new libraries since '84, but we're still doing preservation and conservation in older buildings. Is that a factor? Are environmental factors involved in older buildings that are a problem?
Oh, it sure is. Remember, at New York Public, we used to be concerned. We spent a lot of money there on microfilming materials and then placed the microfilms themselves back in environmentally unsatisfactory conditions. All over the country, environmental conditions are hurting materials. One problem in the United States has been that we've had a long tradition of overheating our buildings, and as a result, we've baked our books. These brittle books have had that process accelerated by overheating, and the same problem doesn't exist in the same degree in Western Europe, for instance, where that didn't occur.
Is it possible then the Arab oil embargo helped preserve some of our culture?
Well, there was a wonderful irony about the energy crisis of the early 70s. Just as we were beginning to get excited about preservation, we also got concerned about energy conservation, and that helped depress some temperatures. It also helped turn off air conditioners. And I want to point out that one of the important things about proper environmental storage is to avoid extensive and rapid fluctuations of temperature and relative humidity. We still, many of us still have the problem that we turn off our systems on weekends and holidays, and that leads to some of those fluctuations that are harmful.
Connie, even without the environment and paper that is somewhat acidic, just using a book, I suppose, can harm it somewhat, especially if I want to mark a page by dog-earing it, or maybe stretch the binding a little so it stays open to the page I want. You probably don't like to see me do that in your library. How much harm is done to books just by using them?
Well, quite a bit of harm, but of course we don't want to preserve materials and then not make them accessible to people. We believe that one of the best ways that preservation can be accomplished is actually through educating people who are using books. Most people who are using books aren't intentionally damaging the books, they just don't know any better. And one of the main ways that books are damaged is through photocopying. Often people, in trying to get every last word on the page on a photocopy, will break a book's back.
In opening them to spread them across the glass. Sure, that makes sense. The title of our program again is Fighting Slow Fires. Surely, despite the massive scope and impact of the deterioration of printed materials, there are solutions available. Connie, I want you to give us some. What's being done to fight slow fires?
A lot's being done. I think we'll see a lot in the upcoming video segment, but a lot's being done nationally, and a lot's also being done at the state level, for instance, in our program and other states. But most is still being done at the level of the individual institution. And at that level, I would stress that the most effective preservation first begins with planning. Sometimes that begins with something like a survey or a self-study, and proceeds by establishing priorities based on things like the use of the materials, their condition, and their research importance, and then going from there to really decide what treatments are best and how you can get the most out of your money.
Good point. I wonder about planning at your big library, Syracuse University, David. What sort of planning goes on there, and what's unique to that library?
Well, really at Syracuse we owe the state program the incentive to develop a preservation program. Unlike New York Public Library, which has had one since, ages ago. And it's done a lot. Our program involves a lot of planning, a multi-pronged effort in a variety of ways. It involves cleaning the collection. It involves microfilming deteriorating materials. We have established, thanks to the program, a mendery. I already mentioned the recorded sound projects. And one of the things that is unique at Syracuse is a major project we're working on with an archival collection dealing with adult education, one of the largest such collections in the world. And what we're experimenting with there is the possibility of optical disc as a possible preservation medium. And we also, of course, do actual restoration of valuable books, and we used state funds to do that for our Audubon elephant folio, for example.
Some of this must be a mystery in that I don't suppose anyone knows how long machine-readable code on a floppy disk is going to be saved.
Oh, it's a frightening prospect, how much might be lost through the digitization. We don't know. There are no standards for archival preservation of electronic bits. And there are a lot of unanswered questions there, just as there are in video and film and audio preservation.
There are a lot of techniques. In fact, I'd like you to look at some of them, some of the techniques and principles of conservation. The New York Public Library Conservation Laboratory carries out conservation activities for the vast collection of that library.
The conservation of books and other materials includes a variety of approaches, from the simple to the complex. Conservation treatment ranges from the maintenance of entire collections to the detailed treatment of single items. Cleaning and proper handling can be of benefit to an entire collection. Specific cases may require more complex and costly measures involving highly trained conservators.
I think preservation is the broad range of activities of their institutional or managerial activities designed to ensure that either information and or the artifacts survive. That is, we're concerned with environmental conditions. I think that's probably the first and most important component. We're concerned with storage systems, matting systems, book handling systems, protective enclosures, the way readers use books, and whether items survive in many ways depend on how we treat them within the library.
Books and paper in general are like people. People are most comfortable in a temperature around 70 degrees and a relative humidity of about 40 to 50%. And interestingly enough, books and paper are best stored under similar conditions. Also, people thrive with pure air, and filtered air is very important in book storage areas. People thrive on gentle, thoughtful treatment, and so do books.
Conservation begins with control of the storage environment. Dust, heat, humidity, and light all hasten the deterioration of books and other materials. A regular stack maintenance program will control dust and grime while ensuring that books are shelved properly. Light shining on collections should be controlled as well. Ideally, relative humidity should be monitored and regulated. But many simple changes can make a difference as well.
What is most important, I think, is an awareness of the very great importance of proper storage methods. That is, when you shelve books, not having them too tightly together on the shelf, having them loose enough so that you can draw a book properly by the middle of the spine from the shelf.
Conservation is guided by principles which call for minimal intervention. Any conservation treatment should employ stable materials and techniques that are reversible. Its impact on an object should not be permanent. Library and archival materials needing conservation are treated for utility and not to improve their cosmetic appearance. Conservation treatment begins with a thorough examination. The composition and construction of an object must be determined. The entire conservation process must be documented. Photographs are often taken to document the pre-treatment condition. Treatment documentation also includes accurate written records and a description of all that is done to an object.
The real principles in any conservation treatment is that we like to intervene as little as possible. We do minimal treatment. Really the least we have to do to stabilize the item. We're not trying to make it look new, to aesthetically be pleasing. We aren't trying to reinterpret the object or make it as the artist saw it. We're trying simply to do as little as possible to ensure the item survives.
Protective enclosures, such as acid-free file folders and book boxes, provide excellent protection for library materials at relatively low cost and with a minimum of intervention. A microenvironment is created which protects the material from light, dust, and dirt, fluctuations in temperature and humidity. Boxing fragile materials also protects them from abrasion in shelving and handling. In order for a book box to be truly effective, it must fit the book properly. Another low-intervention technique used to preserve original materials, such as these letters written by George Washington, involves encapsulation between two sheets of inert polyester film. The edges were sealed using an ultrasonic welder. Over time, improper storage of materials can result in a rigid brittleness, making them unusable. These papers of the United States Sanitary Commission date from the 1860s and include such materials as the autopsy report for Abraham Lincoln. The materials must be gradually humidified before further examination.
As the first stage in their treatment, we're humidifying them, flattening them, placing them in acid-free folders and boxes, simply improving the storage conditions.
When paper becomes acidic, it is brittle, a major cause of deterioration. One method of dealing with this problem is to wash the paper in water, then soak it in an alkaline bath. This treatment inhibits deterioration, but does not strengthen the paper or make it any less brittle. After drying, the item may be treated further and then stored in a non-acidic storage container or box.
Much of the science of botany relies on historical material, and of course the material needs to be preserved. These are the notebooks that the scientists, particularly the botanists, brought into the field on collecting expeditions, and many of them were simply too brittle or fragile to use, and so the conservation staff performed conservation techniques on many of these items in the collection. The work done on these volumes have now made them available to researchers or anyone wanting to use the items in the collection.
We conceive of our work as being, I think, of limited duration. That is, we hope it's for an extended use of time. We try to structurally produce something that will last 500 years.
Microfilming is used to preserve the informational content of a publication when the condition of the artifact itself is beyond conservation, or where conservation is not cost-effective. Often, the original material cannot be consulted again after the microfilming process. Therefore, quality control is a critical element in the microfilming process. Microfilm duplication provides greater access to information without further endangering the original material. It is sometimes the only remaining record of a work or collection. Through the use of a computer network, libraries across the country can determine if a specific publication has previously been microfilmed and thereby minimize costly duplication.
And according to the records that I see here on the screen, there already is a copy available, so New York Public Library will not have to film it. What we will try to do is we will try to contact this institution and request a positive copy of the microfilm for our records.
Photographs can be preserved by creating archivally processed duplicates. In the case of one-of-a-kind articles, this may be the only way to ensure their longevity and availability to future generations.
We have over 450,000 books and journals. We have a photograph collection, a film collection. We curate the archives of the museum from the very beginning. Now these albums, the first two albums are called the Jessup albums. They're from the Jessup North Pacific expedition. We're told that some of this material is not even available in the Soviet Union, that these portraits of Siberia at that turn of the century are unique.
The slow fires of deterioration threaten all of our repositories, large and small. Our culture, as it exists on paper, is at stake. From proper handling and shelving to complex conservation treatment techniques, the principles of conservation should be applied to slow the advancing destruction.
As in the first segment, you're struck in a way by the tremendous variety of endangered materials. In addition to books, there were letters there from George Washington, an autopsy report on Abraham Lincoln, drawings, manuscripts, photographs. The techniques of conservation vary widely. The levels of skill and costs required to execute the techniques must also range considerably. And Connie, that raises a question that it's very impressive what the New York Public Library is doing. But there are so many small little libraries. Can they really expect to preserve and conserve to get a handle on these things?
Well, different institutions have different needs based on their mission and their collections. And many smaller institutions or different types of institutions like public libraries and school libraries have very different collections than, say, the New York Public Library. And for them, they should remember, of course, that we do have discretionary grant applications that can help them with some of these things, but also a lot of preservation is common sense and doesn't cost that much. You can do a lot in terms of moving collections so that they're not in the basement where they're likely to be flooded if there's too much rain, or take them out of the attic where they'll deteriorate because they get too hot. Having a written plan in case something like that happens to help you minimize damage can do a lot. There are a lot of just common sense things. And also, materials often, a whole collection perhaps, should be put into acid-free folders, like
Right.
a collection of manuscripts, rather than sending them off for expensive conservation treatment.
Anyone where they can get help? Somebody looking at these problems for them?
Well, one of the things that is eligible under the discretionary grant program is having someone in to do a survey or to help you plan for conservation.
Okay. Again, we hope that you will have some questions and comments relating to conservation for the panel. We are accepting calls throughout the program. Call us collect. The area code 518, the number is 473-5941. In fact, let's turn now to one of the calls waiting on the line. Hi, where are you calling from? What would you like to ask?
Hi, I'm David from Manhattan.
Hi, David.
Hi.
What would you like to ask?
Well, I was just wondering if the New York Public Library is using laser disc technology. Are you moving any material onto laser discs like I think one of the encyclopedia companies has done?
Yeah, there are a number of things available now. Thank you, David. It's a good question, and CD-ROM, as it's going to be known in the computer business. But David, you mentioned that there are no real standards there, are there?
Well, I'm not sure about the specific answer at New York Public. I can't speak for that institution, although I was there for a number of years. The concern about laser technology, optical disc, CD-ROM as a possible preservation medium is that there are no assurances, guarantees, or standard as to the longevity of the material and how safe it is for preservation. I wanted to mention earlier that we've recently in this country established a Commission on Preservation and Access, growing out of a number of years of work on the brittle book problem. The Commission's first product, really, we should acknowledge, it was a documentary prize-winning film called Slow Fires.
Nice name.
It fits in well today. In their work in dealing with the brittle book problem has led to continuing use of microfilm as the most tried and true preservation medium, one which can be used for other digitized products, which can provide the access and service that we want to provide, but doesn't leave us with the possibility of the disappearance of that as quickly or more quickly than brittle paper.
Or optical disc, where we're dealing with the unknown.
That's right.
Okay. We'll move on, take another call. Hi, where are you calling from? What would you like to ask?
Yes, hi, my name is Rob, and I'm calling from Bridgewater, New Jersey.
Hi, Robin.
And I was wondering, my husband's involved in publishing, and the books they publish, they make an effort to print them on low-acid paper. And even though the books are large paperback books, they're sewn in signatures, and they're true books. Has there been much of an effort through the publishing community to make more permanent books today without everything being throwaway product?
That's a good question. Thank you, Robin. And Connie, let me give it to you and also ask, is there any hope of getting special copies made for libraries that are on alkaline paper or sewn more carefully?
Well, I think there is hope. I think that publishers are becoming more and more aware that the public wants wants their books printed on alkaline paper that will last longer. And also, as alkaline paper is becoming more and more feasible, as more mills are producing it, it's just becoming something that's much easier to get a hold of than it was 10 years ago. Alkaline paper is, once a plant has been converted, essentially no more expensive than, and maybe even less expensive than, producing acidic paper. In addition, it has the benefit of being less expensive to bring an alkaline paper-making plant up to environmental standards than an acidic one. And in regards to the second part of your question, I personally would like to see not really special materials done for libraries, but just more of everything done on alkaline paper, which, if it's not that much more expensive, should not be a problem.
Let me ask a real stupid question, but how can I tell when I go to a bookstore and buy a book Whether it's on alkaline or acidic paper, is there any sort of stamp or symbol or anything?
There's an infinity sign on the back side of the title page.
There is. So
Of some books.
Of some books.
Of some books.
Nonetheless, I can put some economic pressure on publishers by making a point to buy books with the infinity symbol on it, which is kind of an 8 on its side.
Yeah. Could I add a comment on the alkaline paper? We're making progress domestically, but for large research libraries, which acquire a great deal of materials from the Third World, from Europe, Europe is seeing some progress too, but it doesn't fully solve our problem prospectively, and we do have to worry about treatment of materials coming from Africa, South Asia, and so forth. It's not a panacea for...
And the upfront problem right now are materials produced in the past 150 to 200 years, which for triage is what you're dealing with now. And we're going to look at some of that because one past recipient of a discretionary grant is the Adirondack Museum at Blue Mountain Lake. That museum is known for its interesting, informative displays and exhibits which bring the Adirondack region to life. Like many museums, the Adirondack Museum also has a library that plays a crucial function in the role of the museum.
We call ourselves a regional history museum. It's an area of great mountains and lakes and forests, a marvelous natural resource region. It's a large region, with a very, for New York State, distinctive history, with distinctive people who have worked at occupations like logging and mining, work in the hotels and in the large camps that were built. And we try to tell something about that, those aspects of the region's history in the exhibits here at the museum, and also in the publications that we bring out and the things that we preserve and interpret here at the museum. The library exists on its own, and outside researchers use the library as a matter of course. There are many important books that have been published using materials that were assembled in the library, but museum staff use the library right along for exhibitions. One of the consequences of doing a major exhibition is that you often pull in some very important artifacts and records, and these Witherby Sherman papers were an instance of that. We thought it was important to put it on microfilm to preserve it so that researchers would have access to it.
We have researchers come from all over the United States, Canada. We've had researchers in from Europe. We have academics, people working on dissertations, papers, people working on books. We've had maps that have been involved in court cases over land disputes, manuscript maps that show property lines, things like that. And of course the museum staff who use the collection both to research the exhibits as well as to write books. We had a set of papers that were a collection unto themselves, a collection of mining business ledgers from a mining company, and they were in need of preservation. They had to be reformatted in order to be useful for researchers and also to save the information that was in them.
Without historical materials that you find in libraries, a curator would have very little to base his judgments upon. The objects are very important, and people think when they go to a museum that, wow, look at all these nifty objects. Well, you find out largely about those objects by what's in libraries and research depositories. The written word, in other words, is telling us what many of these things are. Publications of catalogs, Sears and Roebuck catalogs, trade catalogs, descriptions of objects, interiors, grist mills, all of these things are in the written word, and we can use those resources to document what we have in the three-dimensional. That's how curators tell people what they've done, what they know, what's important, what's not important. And we hope at the same time it'll be fun. You have a whole range of materials that can come out of business records that tell you not only about the function of large and small institutions, business institutions, but you really get some very interesting information about how everyday workers managed and worked and what life was like in the workplace. You can find out how workers were treated, what they were paid, what their recreational activities were, what the views of the owner were toward, say, drinking, toward holidays, toward benefits of all kinds. Some were very enlightened, some were not enlightened.
History without fact is fable. Ultimately, it's the historical fact that provides us with the factual web that enables us to recreate life in a community or in a state or in a nation. What is significant is that preservation of historical documents gives us documentation. Without documentation, we no longer have fact, we have fable. A people without a past are a people without an identity. One of the significant aspects of more recent research has been, you might say, a discovery of the common men and women who have made up our communities. And I believe one of the significance of historical research is to delve into these minor materials that have heretofore been overlooked: school records, church records, photos and documents that people have stuck in their attics, to reveal the everyday realities of everyday people.
The records which are here are of special importance to folklorists because they do give a slice of life of the past century, and this type of information is extremely important in comparing with the present, such things as how mining is done, what kinds of supplies were used, how people lived. And in this way, the historian can preserve and obtain a picture of life as it was lived perhaps in 1850 in that community.
The museum's grant project, microfilming the Witherby Sherman Company papers, was in a lot of ways made sense as a project and sort of invited a grant proposal. It was a discrete, sort of a self-contained type of project. It was a collection in and of itself that needed a specific type of treatment in order to be usable by researchers and also to preserve long-term.
Not only should we preserve the records and the information from the past, but we must also take care to preserve the records and the materials of the current day, so that these will be available to historians hundreds, perhaps thousands of years from now. It seems to me that any person who is a collector, if they go to the trouble of collecting the materials, also has the obligation to preserve it.
Gather round me, you people, so young and so fine, and I'll sing you a song of the Ironville mine. Though it's known far and wide for high-quality ore, they've shut down the mines and are digging no more.
Amazing how much information can be drawn from something as dry or seemingly dry as business ledgers. But curators and folklorists and scholars are all able to draw raw material from information in the ledger to use it to reconstruct an era, which kind of raises the question to me of what do you save and what do you throw away? David spoke earlier of saving 3 to 5%. How do you decide what to preserve, what to give a grant to preserve, and what to throw away?
Well, in terms of what we look for in a grant, one of the things we look for is important research value, and the people applying need to convince the external reviewers about the importance of what they're applying for. It doesn't always have to be something that is of importance across the country. If it's something that's of importance to the local community, that might be enough. Another thing we look for is obviously a good, sound plan of work. It needs to be something that can be done within a 12-month period because that's the grant period. And it also needs to be something that's appropriate. For instance, we wouldn't want to fund something to rebind brittle books because they wouldn't hold up to that kind of treatment. Microfilming might be more appropriate for that. We also look for the commitment from the institution, because we like to think of this money in the discretionary grant program as seed money that will go to actually encourage the growth of preservation programs and continuing projects. And in that same vein, we look for institutional contribution. Although it's not one-to-one matching, we look for contribution either of time of the staff of the institution or money on the institution's part. And also, we look for accessibility, because this is state money, and it's very important that if it goes to preserve collections, that those collections be available to the people of the state of New York.
Yes. Let me move on, take some calls quickly, because we are getting short on time, but I want to talk to you. Hi, where are you calling from? What would you like to ask?
From the Broome County Historical Society Research Library, and I'd like to ask, like to make a statement that I've been working in local newspapers trying to do a survey and see what newspapers haven't been microfilmed yet. And I think there's a great need for some money to be available to have newspapers microfilmed that haven't been, especially the weekly papers. I find are getting in bad condition. Even the ones from the 30s and 40s are, won't last another 5 years.
Sure, a lot of history in those papers, David.
There's been a great deal of interest nationally in newspaper preservation. Most of it organized through something we haven't mentioned before, the Preservation Office of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and they have organized quite a lot of support for newspaper preservation, usually organized by states. We're hoping that the New York State program and the discretionary grant program can move into that area and either supplement or be complementary to the national program, and we hope in the next round of grants that some newspaper preservation might be possible.
Sounds like she's probably right. We're paying attention to the big city dailies, but the weeklies may be getting overlooked.
That's right. And furthermore, newspapers are the most embrittled materials we've got, and yet it contains so much raw material of local and regional history. It's very important.
Okay.
And it's a good question.
Another call. Hi, where are you calling from? What would you like to ask?
Hi, my name is Harvey. I'm from Brooklyn.
Hi, Harvey.
I have a two-part question to address to the handling of bound materials in the photocopying process.
Mm-hmm.
Several years ago, I had some extensive photocopying done, and it seemed to me the staff did not always handle the materials that carefully. Is there any training and oversight? And two, is there any resolution to the conflict between preserving the binding and yet having the photocopy be as clear to the inside margin as possible?
Two good questions. Who wants to start with staff training?
More and more is being done with staff training. In fact, one of the coordinated preservation projects that I didn't mention was a 15-minute videotape designed to train staff and library users in care and handling of materials. It's very important for staff to understand what should be done to preserve the materials.
I'm real short on time. Part two quickly. I want a good copy. What about the binding?
It's hard because really on most photocopy machines, all you can do is not apply any more pressure than absolutely necessary to get the copy. There are better machines, but most small libraries don't have them.
Okay. We have not been able to answer all of your questions, but we will. All of the questions will be answered by mail or telephone. I'd like to thank the panelists for their contributions today. Also thank you, the audience, for watching, especially those of you who have called in. Please join us next on Tuesday, May 3rd, 3 in the afternoon, the next in our Learning in New York teleconference series. The topic then will be college opportunities for minority and disadvantaged students in New York State. Again, thanks for joining us. Have a good day.
For more information, contact the Conservation Preservation Program, Division of Library Development, Room 10C47, Cultural Education Center, Albany, New York, 12230.